The morning sun filtered through the massive crystal dome of the Galactic University, casting rainbow patterns across the lecture hall walls. Professor Vextar stood at the front of the classroom, his purple tentacles moving in slow, graceful waves. As he prepared his holographic display system, the air hummed with nervous energy as students from dozens of different worlds settled into their seats. Today was the day they would learn about Earth, the most feared planet in the known galaxy. Minho sat in the back row of the lecture hall, trying to look as small as possible in his chair. He was the only human in the entire university, and sometimes the stares from his alien classmates made him uncomfortable. His dark hair was messy from running to class, and his simple Earth clothes looked plain compared to the elaborate garments worn by the other students. In the front rows sat the Saurian students, their green-scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights. Their long necks swayed slightly as they whispered to each other in their hissing language. Minho could see their forked tongues flicking out to taste the air around them. The largest Saurian was named Rixtal, and he always asked the most questions during lectures. Next to the Saurians were the Klaxon students, who looked like giant insects with their hard, shiny exoskeletons and multiple arms. They made soft clicking sounds when they communicated, and their large compound eyes reflected the light in strange ways. The female Klaxon, named Tychros, had been friendly to Minho during his first week, but even she seemed nervous around him sometimes. The Vortex students sat separately from the others because their crystalline bodies created musical tones when they moved. Their transparent forms caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the walls when they shifted in their seats. The youngest Vortex was named Zilana, as she always took detailed notes during every lecture. Professor Vextar cleared his throat, making a sound like water gurgling through pipes. His large black eyes swept across the classroom, taking in each student before he began to speak. The universal translator devices that everyone wore buzzed to life, converting his words into each student's native language. Today we begin our study of the most dangerous planet in our galaxy, Professor Vextar announced, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and fear. Earth is what we call a death world. No other planet has produced more deadly creatures per square kilometer than this terrifying place. The students leaned forward in their seats. Minho noticed how their breathing changed and their body language shifted. Everyone except him seemed genuinely frightened by the professor's words. He tried to understand why his home planet scared everyone so much. The professor activated his holographic display, and a three-dimensional image of Earth appeared floating in the center of the classroom. The blue and green planet looked peaceful and beautiful as it slowly rotated in the artificial light, but the professor quickly zoomed in on the vast blue oceans. Look at these waters, Professor Vextar said dramatically. They may appear calm, but they hide some of the most efficient killing machines ever evolved. The first creature we will examine is the great white shark. The hologram changed to show a massive shark swimming through dark blue water. Its triangular fins cut through the water with deadly grace, and its black eyes seemed to stare directly at the students. The shark's mouth opened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth that gleamed like white daggers. This apex predator can grow to over 6 meters in length. Professor Vextar continued, his tentacles gesturing wildly. It can sense a single drop of blood from 3 kilometers away. Its bite force is strong enough to crush the hull of a small spacecraft. One bite from this creature would cut most of you in half. Gasps echoed through the classroom. Several Saurian students hissed in alarm, and the Klaxon students began clicking their mandibles nervously. The Vortex students created a low humming sound that filled the air with musical tension. Rixtal raised one of his scaled hands. Professor, how did any intelligent life survive on such a world? Professor Vextar nodded approvingly at the question. That, my dear student, is what makes Earth so fascinating and terrifying at the same time. The fact that any species could evolve intelligence on such a deadly world tells us something incredible about the survivors. The professor changed the hologram to show a massive brown bear standing on its hind legs. The creature towered over the students, even in its holographic form. Its long claws gleamed like metal weapons, and its powerful muscles rippled beneath its thick fur. This is a grizzly bear, Professor Vextar explained. It weighs over 400 kilograms and can run faster than most hoverbikes. Its claws can tear through reinforced metal plating, and its bite can crush bones like twigs. These creatures are found across large portions of Earth's northern continents. The bear in the hologram dropped to all fours and began walking toward the students. Several alien students actually pushed their chairs backward even though they knew the image was not real. The bear's small dark eyes seemed intelligent and calculating as it studied them, but the truly terrifying thing about Earth Professor Vexstar continued is that the large predators are not even the most dangerous threats. The planet has evolved creatures that kill in ways we never imagined possible. The hologram shifted to show a coiled cobra, its hood spread wide and its scales shimmering with an oily rainbow pattern. The snake's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, and its vertical pupils contracted as it focused on something off-screen. This serpent carries enough venom to kill 50 adult klaxons within minutes, Professor Vexstar said quietly. The toxin attacks the nervous system, causing paralysis and respiratory failure, but the worst part is that the victim remains conscious throughout the entire process. Several students made sounds of distress. The Vortex students began harmonizing in what sounded like a funeral dirge. The klaxon students clicked their mandibles rapidly, and the Saurian students swayed their heads from side to side. Earth creatures have evolved the most creative ways to end life, the professor continued. Some use poison, others use brute force, and the most cunning use psychological warfare. They have learned to exploit every possible weakness in their prey. Throughout the lecture, Minho sat quietly in his chair. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he watched his classmates react with horror to the animals he had grown up around. He remembered feeding ducks at the pond near his house and watching nature documentaries with his little sister. Sahuth Professor activated another hologram showing a school of piranhas swimming through murky water. Their silver bodies moved in perfect coordination and their small sharp teeth gleamed like tiny knives. These fish hunt in groups, Professor Vexstar explained. They can strip the flesh from a large animal in minutes, working together with terrifying efficiency. The water around a feeding frenzy turns red with blood as hundreds of these creatures attack simultaneously. A young Saurian student named Dexmar raised his hand nervously. Professor, are there any safe places on Earth? The professor's tentacles writhed. With what might have been amusement, nowhere is safe, he replied dramatically. The oceans contain creatures that can swallow small ships whole. The land has predators that hunt in coordinated packs with intelligence that rivals some civilized species. Even the sky is dominated by raptors with vision so sharp they can spot prey from impossible distances. The hologram showed a golden eagle, soaring high above a mountain landscape. Its wings barely moved as it rode the air currents, and its keen eyes scanned the ground below for movement. This aerial predator can spot a small animal from over 2 kilometers away. Professor Vexstar said it can dive at speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, striking with enough force to break the spine of its prey. As the lecture continued, Minho found himself thinking about his childhood home. The small farm where he had grown up was surrounded by forests and fields, where many of these so-called deadly creatures lived. He remembered his grandmother Yunha teaching him which mushrooms were safe to eat and which snakes to avoid. The professor showed more holograms of Earth's creatures. Each one brought fresh waves of horror from the alien students. They saw images of wolves hunting in packs, crocodiles lurking in muddy rivers, and giant spiders spinning webs in dark corners. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Earth Professor Vexstar concluded is that these creatures have been locked in an evolutionary arms race for millions of years. Each generation becomes more efficient at killing and more resistant to being killed. The result is a planet where only the most perfectly adapted predators can survive. The classroom fell silent as the students absorbed this information. Minho looked around at his classmates and saw genuine fear in their eyes. They were looking at the holograms of Earth animals, the same way he might look at images of alien war machines. He began to understand that his perspective on these creatures was very different from theirs. To him, they were just animals that lived in the woods and fields around his home. To his classmates, they were the stuff of nightmares. Professor Vexstar seemed to be enjoying himself as he watched his students react with growing horror to each new creature he displayed. The purple tentacles on his head waved more energetically with each gasp and frightened whisper from the classroom. He had spent years studying the death world called Earth, and he loved sharing his knowledge with new students. The next hologram showed a massive saltwater crocodile floating motionless in dark water. Only its eyes and nostrils were visible above the surface, but the professor zoomed the image to show the creature's full length beneath the water. The crocodile was over 7 meters long, with powerful jaws lined with cone-shaped teeth. This ancient predator has remained virtually unchanged for over 200 million years, Professor Vextar announced with dramatic flair. It achieved perfect killing efficiency so long ago that evolution saw no need to improve upon its design. The crocodile in the hologram suddenly exploded into motion, launching itself out of the water with incredible speed. Its massive jaws snapped shut with a sound like thunder. The alien students jumped in their seats, and several Klaxon students began clicking their mandibles in distress. The bite force of this creature exceeds 20,000 pounds per square inch, the professor continued. That is enough pressure to crush a hover car. The crocodile can hold its breath for over an hour, waiting motionless for the perfect moment to strike when it attacks. There is no escapedicros. The female Klaxon student raised one of her forearms. Professor, surely there must be some way to detect these creatures before they attack. Professor Vextar shook his head gravely. They are masters of camouflage and patience. A crocodile can remain completely still for hours or even days, waiting for prey to come close enough. They have been observed floating near riverbanks for weeks, studying the movement patterns of their intended victims. The hologram changed to show a pack of wolves moving through a snowy forest. Their gray fur blended perfectly with the shadows between the trees, and their yellow eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence. The wolves moved in perfect coordination without making a sound. These pack hunters demonstrate some of the most sophisticated hunting strategies in the animal kingdom. Professor Vextar explained they can track prey across vast distances, using scent trails that are days old. Each member of the pack has a specific role during the hunt, and they communicate through a complex system of howls and body language. The lead Volf in the hologram lifted its head and howled. The sound that came through the classroom speakers was haunting and wild. Several Vortex students began harmonizing with the sound, creating an eerie musical accompaniment that made the other students even more nervous. Wolves have been known to chase their prey for hundreds of kilometers, the professor continued. They take turns leading the chase, so the pack never becomes tired. Their prey eventually collapses from exhaustion, and then the wolves move in for the kills. Alana, the young Vortex student, spoke in her musical voice. Professor, what about the microscopic threats you mentioned earlier, Professor? Vextar's eyes brightened with enthusiasm as he activated a new hologram. This one showed various bacteria and viruses magnified thousands of times. The microscopic organisms looked like tiny alien spacecraft with strange spikes and tentacles. Excellent question, he replied. These invisible killers have ended more lives than all the large predators combined. They can spread through air, water, food, and direct contact. Some can survive in extreme conditions that would kill most other life forms. The hologram showed a virus attacking a cell. The virus attached itself to the cell wall and began injecting its genetic material. The cells started to change and multiply, creating thousands of new viruses that spread to attack other cells. This particular virus can spread from one infected individual to thousands of others within days, Professor Vextar explained. The infected beings may not even know they are carrying the disease until it is too late to stop the spread. The classroom fell silent as students imagined invisible death floating through the air around them. The Saurian students began breathing more carefully, and the Klaxon students started cleaning their exoskeletons with nervous precision. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Earth's microscopic threats, the professor continued, is their ability to adapt and evolve. They can develop resistance to treatments and medications within months or even weeks. This makes them nearly impossible to eliminate completely. The next hologram showed a massive great white shark, but this time it was not alone. The image revealed an entire ecosystem of ocean predators, including barracuda, moray eels, and giant octopi. Each creature was perfectly adapted for killing in its own unique way. The oceans of Earth contain layer upon layer of predators. Professor Vextar explained each depth has its own specialized hunters. The surface waters have fast-moving predators that rely on speed and surprise. The deeper waters contain creatures that use bioluminescence to lure prey into range. A giant octopus appeared in the hologram, its 8 arms reaching out in all directions. The creature changed colors, rapidly shifting from brown to red to mottled green as it moved across the ocean. "Floor, this cephalopod has 3 hearts and blue blood," Professor Vextar said with obvious admiration. "It can solve complex puzzles and has been observed using tools to catch prey. Each of its 8 arms contains thousands of suction cups that can taste anything they touch." The octopus in the hologram suddenly squeezed itself through a gap that seemed far too small for its body. The alien students watched in amazement as the creature reformed its shape on the other side. "They have no bones," the professor explained, "so they can fit through any opening larger than their beak. This allows them to hide in spaces where their prey would never expect to find a predator." Throughout all these demonstrations, Minho sat quietly in the back row. He occasionally smiled or chuckled softly to himself, but he seemed remarkably calm compared to his terrified classmates. His relaxed posture was beginning to attract attention from the other students. The professor activated another hologram showing a massive African elephant. The creature stood over 3 meters tall at the shoulder, and its long trunk swayed gently as it walked. The elephant's tusks were like enormous spears of white ivory. "Even the herbivores on Earth are deadly," Professor Vextar announced. "This creature weighs over 6 tons and can run at speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour. When threatened, it will charge with enough force to destroy a small building." The elephant in the hologram suddenly raised its trunk and trumpeted loudly. The sound was so powerful that it seemed to shake the classroom walls. The alien students covered their hearing organs and cowered in their seats. "These giants have been known to seek revenge against those who harm their families," the professor continued. "They have excellent memories and can recognize individual enemies years after an initial encounter. There are documented cases of elephants tracking down and killing hunters who had attacked their herds." A Saurian student named Corval raised his hand nervously. "Professor, how do we know so much about these creatures if Earth is so dangerous to visit?" Professor Vextar nodded approvingly at the question. "Brave xenobiologists have studied these beasts from orbit using advanced scanning technology and automated probes. Direct contact with most Earth creatures means certain death for our species." The professor paused and looked directly at Minho in the back row. "However, we do have one source of information that has proven invaluable." In our research, all eyes in the classroom turned to look at Minho, who suddenly found himself the center of attention. His cheeks turned slightly red, but he maintained his calm expression. "Our human exchange student has provided us with first-hand accounts of life on Earth," Professor Vextar continued, "though I must admit some of his stories seem almost too incredible to believe." The alien students stared at Minho with a mixture of awe and terror. They were looking at someone who had actually lived among these nightmare creatures and survived. The fact that he seemed so normal and peaceful made the whole situation even more disturbing. How could someone who grew up surrounded by such deadly predators appear so calm and harmless? The alien students began to whisper among themselves in their various languages, trying to understand this puzzle. Minho shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he felt the weight of their stares. He had not expected to become part of the lecture, and he was not sure how to respond to their obvious fear and fascination. The professor continued, showing more holograms of Earth creatures. Each new image brought fresh waves of horror from the alien students. They saw poisonous frogs that could kill with a single touch, giant anacondas that could crush their prey to death, and swarms of army ants that could strip flesh from bone in minutes. As the lecture progressed, the alien students began to notice something strange about their human classmate. While they were becoming more and more terrified with each new revelation, Minho seemed to be growing more relaxed and amused. His occasional chuckles and smiles suggested that he found their reactions entertaining rather than understandable. This observation made the alien students even more nervous. If the human was not afraid of these creatures, what did that say about humans themselves? The lecture continued with Professor Vextar displaying increasingly terrifying creatures from Earth. The latest hologram showed a box jellyfish drifting through tropical waters. Its transparent body was almost invisible against the blue background, but its long tentacles trailed behind it like deadly ribbons. "This creature is one of the most venomous animals on Earth," Professor Vexstar announced with obvious respect in his voice. The box jellyfish is nearly impossible to see in the water making it the perfect ambush predator. The jellyfish in the hologram pulsed gently as it moved, but the professor zoomed in to show the microscopic stinging cells covering its tentacles. Each cell contained a tiny harpoon loaded with potent venom. A single touch from these tentacles delivers enough toxin to kill 60 adult beings within minutes, the professor explained. The pain is so intense that victims often die from shock before the venom can complete its work. The few survivors described the sensation as being burned alive from the inside. The Klaxon students began clicking their mandibles in distress, while the Saurian students hissed softly among themselves. The Vorthic students created a low humming sound that filled the classroom. With musical tension, everyone seemed to be imagining the horrible death that awaited anyone unlucky enough to encounter this creature. Tikros raised one of her forearms. Professor, how do xenobiologists study these creatures without being killed, Professor? Vexstar nodded gravely. We use heavily shielded remote-operated vehicles and maintain a safe distance of at least several kilometers. Even our most advanced protective suits cannot guarantee survival against Earth toxins. The professor activated another hologram showing a tiny blue ringed octopus sitting on a coral reef. The creature was barely larger than a student's hand, but its skin pulsed with brilliant blue circles that seemed to glow with their own light. Do not let the size of this creature fool you, Professor Vexstar warned. This octopus carries enough venom to kill 26 autoclaxons. The toxin causes complete paralysis while the victim remains fully conscious. They can see and hear everything, but cannot move or speak as their body shuts down. Several students made sounds of horror. The idea of being trapped in a paralyzed body while dying slowly seemed worse than any other death they could imagine. The most disturbing aspect, the professor continued, is that there is no known antidote. Once the venom enters the bloodstream, death is inevitable. The only treatment is to keep the victim alive with artificial breathing machines until the toxin breaks down naturally. A young Saurian student named Dexmar spoke up nervously. Professor, in all your research about these deadly creatures, have you learned what kills them? Professor Vexstar paused thoughtfully. That is an excellent question. Most of these creatures have few natural enemies. They are apex predators that sit at the top of their food chains. The professor showed a hologram of a great white shark attacking a seal. The massive predator struck with incredible speed and power, tearing its prey apart in seconds. This shark has no natural enemies in the ocean, Professor Vexstar explained. Adult great whites are too large and powerful for any other creature to attack successfully. They are essentially living weapons that have evolved to perfection. At this point, Minho finally raised his hand. The movement was slow and casual, but it caught Professor Vexstar's attention immediately. The classroom fell silent as all eyes turned to the human student. Yes, human Minho, the professor said. Do you have a question about your homeworld? Dangerous fauna. Minho stood up slowly, his expression thoughtful and curious. Professor, I was wondering about something. In all your research about Earth creatures, did you happen to study what they are afraid of? The question seemed to catch Professor Vexstar completely off guard. His tentacles writhed in confusion as he processed what the human had asked. Afraid of, he repeated slowly. These are apex predators, student. They are the most dangerous creatures in the known galaxy. What could they possibly fear? Minho tilted his head slightly. Really? Because where I grew up, we had most of these animals in our backyard, and they all seemed pretty scared of us. The words hit the classroom like a physical blow. Students stopped breathing and stared at Minho with expressions of shock and disbelief. The idea that Earth's most deadly creatures were afraid of anything seemed impossible. The Saurian students began hissing quietly among themselves, while the Klaxon students clicked their mandibles in rapid, nervous patterns. The Vortex students created a harmony that sounded like a funeral dirge. Scared of you, Professor Vexstar repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That is impossible. These creatures dominate their environment. They are the rulers of Earth. Minho shrugged casually. Well, not really. I mean, my little sister Soha used to catch those poisonous snakes with her bare hands when she was about 10 years old. We kept some of them as pets for a while. The silence in the classroom was absolute. Students stared at Minho as if he had just claimed to breathe vacuum or eat stars. The idea that a 10-year-old human child could capture venomous serpents barehanded was beyond their comprehension. Vorthak student named Korath finally managed to speak in a trembling crystalline voice. You kept the death serpents as companions, sure, Minho replied with a friendly smile, though we had to be really careful with them. Not because they would hurt us, but because they were pretty fragile. My friend Jiwan accidentally squeezed one too hard. When we were kids and it died, Professor Vextar's eyes bulged from his head, fragile. These creatures can kill dozens of galactic citizens with a single bite, yeah, but they are really small, Minho explained patiently. Most of them try to run away when they see people coming, the big ones like bears and wolves usually just avoid us completely, though my uncle Kyung works at a zoo and he handles them every day for his job. The revelation that humans regularly handled these nightmare creatures without special protection sent shockwaves through the classroom. Students began whispering frantically among themselves in their native languages. Minho continued speaking in the same casual tone. Actually, most of these animals are way more afraid of us than we are of them. That is why my grandmother Yunha always told us to make noise when we went hiking in the woods. Make noise, Professor Vextar repeated weakly, so we would not accidentally surprise them and scare them, Minho explained, stressed. Animals can be unpredictable, so it is better for everyone if they just know we are coming and can get out of our way. The professor felt his worldview crumbling around him. These creatures that had terrorized galactic nightmares for centuries were apparently considered minor nuisances by humans. The death world that had inspired fear across dozens of civilizations was just home to this calm young student. But how is that possible? The professor managed to ask. How can soft biological beings like humans survive among such deadly predators? Minho looked genuinely confused by the question. We are not really that soft, Professor. Most of us are pretty tough. We heal quickly from injuries and we can adapt to almost any environment. He paused and looked around the classroom at the terrified alien faces. Plus, we are really good at working together. When there is a problem, we solve it as a group. We have been doing that for thousands of years. The students were beginning to understand that something was very wrong with their assumptions about Earth. The human was not describing a desperate struggle for survival. He was talking about his home planet the way they might describe a peaceful garden world. Minho noticed their confused expressions and tried to be helpful. I think maybe you are looking at this backwards, he said gently. These animals are not really dangerous to us. They are just part of the environment we grew up in. The implication of his words slowly sank in across the classroom. If the creatures were not dangerous to humans, then what did that say about humans themselves? Professor Vextar slumped in his chair, his tentacles hanging limply. The foundation of his entire lecture was crumbling. The most feared planet in the galaxy was apparently just a normal home to the species that lived there. The alien students looked at Minho with growing unease. He seemed so friendly and harmless, but he was casually describing mastery over creatures that could kill them without effort. What else were humans capable of if they considered apex predators to be minor inconveniences? The classroom atmosphere had changed completely from academic curiosity to something much more tense and uncertain. Professor Vextar struggled to regain control of his lecture as the implications of Minho words sank in among the alien students. Professor Vextar cleared his throat and tried to sound authoritative, but his voice shook slightly. Human Minho, surely you are exaggerating about your interactions with these deadly creatures. Minho looked genuinely puzzled by the professor's doubt. Not really, he said. I mean, most people on Earth have similar experiences. We all grow up around these animals. The professor activated his holographic display, again showing the great white shark from earlier. This apex predator has ruled Earth oceans for millions of years, he said desperately. How could humans possibly interact with such a perfect killing machine? Those, Minho said with recognition. My cousin Jinwoo is a marine biologist, and he swims with sharks all the time for his research. He says they are usually pretty curious about humans, but they mostly just want to be left alone. The Saurian students began hissing in alarm, while the Klaxon students clicked their mandibles rapidly. The idea of voluntarily entering the water with a great white shark seemed like the most insane form of suicide they could imagine. Swims with them, Professor Vextar repeated in a strangled voice. Yeah, though he wears a metal cage sometimes when he is working with the bigger ones, Minho explained. Not because They attack him, but because they might accidentally bump into him while they are investigating and their skin is really rough. The professor showed the grizzly bear hologram again. This creature weighs over 400 kilograms and can crush bones. With its jaws, he said weakly. Minho nodded. Oh, we have lots of those in the mountains near my hometown. The park rangers have to deal with them pretty regularly when they wander into campsites looking for food. Deal with them, the professor whispered. Usually they just make loud noises and the bears go back into the woods, Minho said casually. Sometimes they have to use tranquilizer darts if a bear gets too comfortable around people, but that is mostly to protect the bear from getting into trouble. A Vorthek student named Meltara spoke up in her musical voice. Human Minho, what do you mean protect the bear? Well, if a bear starts associating humans with food, it might become aggressive. Minho explained. When that happens, the Park Service has to relocate the bear to a different area so it can learn to hunt naturally again. The alien students exchanged glances of disbelief. The human was talking about relocating a 400-kilogram apex predator, as if it were a minor administrative task. Professor Vexstar tried a different approach, showing the hologram of the pack of wolves. These creatures hunt in coordinated groups using sophisticated strategies, he said. They are among the most intelligent predators on Earth. Your wolves are really smart. Minho agreed. My great-uncle Deho actually raised one from a pup when he was younger, though technically it was probably a Wolf-dog hybrid, not a pure Wolf-raised one. The professor stammered. It was abandoned by its pack, so he bottle-fed it until it was old enough to eat solid food. Minho said it lived with his family for about 12 years and was really gentle with the kids. The classroom erupted in whispers and nervous sounds. Students could not comprehend how a human family could adopt a pack predator and treat it like a pet. The cultural gap between their understanding and Minho experience seemed impossibly wide. The professor desperately activated the Cobra hologram. This serpent deadly venom kills within minutes, he said. There is no known antidote to its toxin. Minho squinted at the image. That looks like a king cobra, he said. My neighbor Seongjin keeps a few of those in terrariums in his basement. He breeds them and sells them to zoos and research facilities. Keeps them. Professor Vexstar's voice was barely audible. Yeah, though he has to have special permits and training, Minho explained. The local fire department knows about his collection in case there is ever an emergency, but he has been doing it for like 20 years without any problems. A brave Klaxon student named Vixel finally asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Human Minho, if these creatures are not dangerous to your species, what do humans actually fear? Minho thought about the question seriously. Well, each other mostly, he said after a pause. We are probably the most dangerous thing on our planet. Temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Professor Vexstar tentacles went completely still and the alien students stopped making their various nervous sounds. What do you mean by that? The professor asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Minho seemed unaware of the fear he was causing. We are persistence predators, he explained in the same casual tone. We can track almost anything across really long distances. We do not give up easily. The professor felt a chill run through his body. Persistence predators were among the most feared hunting strategies in the galaxy. The idea of being relentlessly pursued by something that never stopped, never tired, and never gave up was a nightmare scenario. Most animals can run faster than us in short bursts, Minho continued, but we just keep following them. We can literally chase them until they collapse from exhaustion. Then we catch them. A Saurian student named Corval asked in a shaking voice. You hunt the apex predator sometimes, Minho said, but mostly we just moved into their territories, and they learned to avoid us over time. The ones that did not learn to stay away from human settlements, well, a lot of those species do not exist anymore. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The alien students were beginning to understand that humans had not survived on Earth, they had conquered it. We also changed the environment to make it more suitable for us, Minho continued. We built cities where dangerous animals used to live. We cleared forests and drained swamps. We domesticated some of the aggressive species and turned them into helpers. Domesticated. Professor Vexstar repeated the word like it was foreign to him. Yeah, thousands of years ago, we tamed wolves and turned them into dogs, Minho said with a smile. Now they help us hunt other animals and guard our homes. We also domesticated cattle and horses and pigs. They provide us with food and materials. The classroom was silent except for the quiet humming of the air circulation system. Students stared at Minho with expressions of awe and terror. He was describing the systematic conquest of an entire planet ecosystem as if it were a normal part of history. My friend Hyunwoo has a pet that is descended from wolves. Minho added helpfully, we call them dogs now, but they still have most of their wild instincts. They are just loyal to humans. Instead of their pack, Professor Vexstar managed to ask, how did you accomplish this domestication? We bred them selectively for thousands of generations, Minho explained. We chose the ones that were most cooperative and friendly toward humans eventually. We created new subspecies that were completely dependent on us for survival. The alien students were horrified by the implications. Humans had not just survived among deadly predators, they had enslaved them and altered their fundamental nature through generations of controlled breeding. We did the same thing with plants, Minho continued. We took wild grasses and fruits and vegetables and bred them until they were exactly what we wanted. Most of our food crops cannot survive without human care anymore. The professor realized that humans had not adapted to Earth environment, they had forced the environment to adapt to them. The death world that terrified the galaxy was actually a carefully managed garden designed to serve human needs. But what about the creatures that could not be domesticated or relocated? The professor asked weakly. Minho shrugged. We learned to live around them, or we developed better ways to deal with them. When I was a kid, there were still some dangerous animals near our town, but the local government had programs to manage them. Professor Vexstar repeated, yeah, like if there was a problem bear or a pack of wild dogs causing trouble, they would send out teams to handle it. Minho said usually they could solve the problem without hurting the animals, but sometimes they had to make difficult decisions. The alien students were beginning to understand that the most dangerous creature on Earth was not the shark or the bear or the venomous snake. It was the quiet, unassuming human who had been sitting in the back row all along. The silence in the classroom stretched on as the alien students processed what they had just heard. Professor Vexstar sat motionless, his tentacles hanging limply at his sides. The foundation of everything he had taught about Earth was crumbling before his eyes. A young Saurian student named Dexmar finally gathered enough courage to ask the question that was haunting everyone. But human Minho, if these creatures avoid your species, what do humans actually consider dangerous? Minho thought about the question carefully, his expression becoming more serious. Well, other humans mostly, he said quietly. We fight each other sometimes, and that can be really dangerous because we know how each other think and fight. The alien students leaned forward. Despite their fear, they needed to understand what could threaten a species that had mastered apex predators. We also have some diseases that can spread quickly between people, Minho continued, though we have gotten pretty good at dealing with those over the years, and natural disasters like earthquakes and storms can be dangerous. But we have warning systems and emergency plans. Professor Vexstar found his voice again. What makes humans dangerous to each other? Minho looked uncomfortable with the question. We are really good at making tools and weapons, he said reluctantly. We can think strategically and plan ahead. We know how to work together in large groups, but we can also be really competitive with each other. The professor activated a hologram showing human cities with millions of people living in close proximity. How do so many humans coexist peacefully? Most of the time we get along fine, Minho said. We have laws and governments and social systems that help us cooperate. We trade with each other and share resources and knowledge, but sometimes there are conflicts. The professor pressed. Minho nodded sadly. Yeah, sometimes groups of humans disagree about important things and they fight. When that happens, it can be really destructive. Because we are good at organizing and we have powerful weapons. A Klaxon student named Tykros asked, what kind of weapons do humans create? Minho looked even more uncomfortable. I would rather not talk about that, he said softly. Let us just say that we learned a long time ago that we needed to be very careful about how we solve disagreements. The alien students exchanged worried glances. The human was clearly avoiding discussing something that frightened even him. Professor Vexstar tried a different approach. How do humans hunt the dangerous creatures you mentioned? We do not really hunt them much anymore, Minho explained. Most of the time we just avoid each other. If there is a problem animal that is threatening people, we have professionals who Deal with it professionals, the professor repeated. Yeah, like wildlife control officers and park rangers, Minho said. They have special training and equipment for handling dangerous animals safely. They try to relocate problem animals first, but sometimes they have to make harder choices. What happens when relocation is not possible? A Vorthak student named Koroth asked in her musical voice. Minho sighed. If an animal keeps threatening people and cannot be moved somewhere safe, then the authorities have to put it down, he said quietly. We do not like doing that, but sometimes there is no other choice. The casual way he discussed ending the life of an apex predator sent chills through the alien students. They were beginning to understand that humans did not see these creatures as equals or even as serious threats, but how can soft biological beings like humans actually kill such powerful predators? Professor Vextar asked. We use tools and work together, Minho explained. We are not very strong or fast compared to most animals, but we are really good at making things that help us. We have been doing it for thousands of years. The professor showed the hologram of the grizzly bear again. This creature has claws that can cut through metal and enough strength to crush bones, yeah, but it does not have guns or tranquilizer darts or helicopters or radio communication, Minho said matter-of-factly. When humans work together with the right equipment, one bear is not really a serious threat. The alien students were horrified by the implications. Humans had not just survived among deadly predators. They had developed technology that made them completely superior to any natural threat. What about the venomous creatures? The professor asked. Desperately, surely their toxins are dangerous to humans. We have antivenom for most of the dangerous ones, Minho said. We also have hospitals and doctors who know how to treat bites and stings. Plus, most venomous animals are pretty small, and they usually try to hide from us. The professor activated the hologram of the great white shark. This apex predator has ruled the oceans for millions of years, he said. Weakly, Minho nodded. Yeah, sharks are really impressive, but they are just animals, he said. We have boats and scuba gear and underwater cameras. We can study them and swim with them safely if we are careful. But what if a shark attacks a human? Saurian student asked. It happens sometimes, but not very often, Minho said. Sharks do not really want to eat people. We do not taste good to them. Most shark attacks are just cases of mistaken identity. The professor felt his last hope slipping away. What about the pack hunters like wolves? We domesticated them thousands of years ago, Minho said. With a slight smile, the wild ones usually avoid human settlements now. They know we are dangerous to Thema Klaxon, student named Vixal asked. How do the animals know humans are dangerous? Minho looked thoughtful. We have been the dominant species on Earth for a really long time, he said. The animals that survived learned to be cautious around us. The ones that did not learn that lesson, well, their species do not exist anymore. The cold reality of his words hit the alien students like a physical blow. Humans had not just conquered Earth, they had shaped its evolution by eliminating any species that posed a real threat to them. Professor Vextar asked in a barely audible voice. How many species have humans eliminated? Minho looked sad. I do not know the exact numbers, he said quietly. We try to protect endangered species now, but in the past we were not always careful about conservation. A lot of animals went extinct because of human activities. The professor realized that humans were not just apex predators, they were a force of nature that had reshaped an entire planet. The death world that terrified the galaxy was actually a carefully managed environment, designed to serve human needs, but surely there are still some creatures that pose a real threat to humans, the professor said desperately. Minho shrugged. Not many of the big ones, he said. Most of the really dangerous stuff is microscopic now, like bacteria and viruses, but we have medicine and vaccines for most of those too. The alien students sat in stunned silence. They had spent the entire lecture learning about Earth's most deadly creatures, only to discover that the most dangerous thing on the planet was the quiet, friendly human sitting in the back row. Professor Vextar slumped in his chair. His entire worldview shattered. The creatures that had inspired fear across dozens of civilizations were nothing more than wildlife management problems to humans. The death world that had terrorized galactic nightmares was just home to a species that had long ago established complete dominance over their environment. As the full implications sank in, the alien students began to look at Minho with a mixture of awe and terror. He seemed so normal and peaceful, but he represented A species that had conquered an entire planet and bent its ecosystem to their will. What else were humans capable of if they considered apex predators to be minor inconveniences? Professor Vextar sat in his chair staring at the holographic display that still showed images of Earth creatures, but now they looked different to him. Instead of terrifying apex predators, he saw animals that lived in a world completely controlled by humans. The revelation had turned his entire understanding upside down. The alien students whispered among themselves in their native languages, trying to process what they had learned. The Saurian students hissed softly while the Klaxon students clicked their mandibles in nervous patterns. The Vortex students created harmonious tones that sounded like a funeral song. Minho looked around the classroom and noticed the strange atmosphere that had developed. He seemed genuinely confused by their fear and fascination. Professor, he said gently, I hope I did not ruin your lecture. I just thought it might be helpful to share a different perspective on these animals. Professor Vextar looked up at the human with new eyes. The friendly student he had known for months was actually a representative of the most successful predator species in galactic history. Student Minho, the professor said slowly, when xenobiologists study these creatures from safe distances in orbit, are they being watched? Minho thought about the question. Probably, he said with a slight smile. Most animals are really curious about new things, especially if they have never seen spacecraft before. They would definitely notice something unusual in their territory. The professor felt a chill run through his body. The brave scientists who had risked their lives to study Earth deadly fauna from what they thought was a safe distance had actually been observed by their subjects like interesting toys. What would these creatures think of alien visitors? Minho, the professor asked. Minho shrugged. They would probably be curious at first, but cautious, he said. Most wild animals are pretty good at judging whether something is dangerous or not. If the aliens stayed in their ships and did not threaten anything, the animals would probably just watch them and then go back to their normal activities. A Vortex student named Meltara asked in her crystalline voice. Human Minho, what would happen if these creatures decided to attack humans directly? Minho's expression grew serious for the first time in the lecture. Well, if any animal species posed a real threat to human communities, we would organize a response, he said carefully. We are really good at working together when we need to solve a problem. The alien students felt their fear increase. The casual way Minho discussed organizing against entire species was terrifying, but honestly, he continued, most animals are smart enough not to try that. They have learned over thousands of years that fighting humans is not a good survival strategy. Professor Vextar realized that the animals had not learned this through instinct but through harsh experience. Any species that had tried to compete with humans had been eliminated from Earth. The professor stood up slowly, his tentacles